He almost ignored the message, until one word made him stop breathing. The notification lit up Daniel Hayes's phone just as the elevator doors slid open to his penthouse office, the soft chime barely noticeable against the distant hum of Manhattan traffic 70 floors below, but the words on the screen were anything but ordinary. I can't afford formula right now, please, my son is hungry, and for a man who received hundreds of emails, texts, and alerts every hour, most demanding, most transactional, this one felt different, raw in a way that didn't belong in his world of tailored suits and billion-dollar negotiations. He stepped inside slowly, the city stretching endlessly behind glass walls, sunlight reflecting off steel towers, everything sharp, controlled, predictable, yet that message lingered, unpolished, desperate, human, across town, in a cramped one-bedroom apartment where the air conditioner rattled louder than it cooled. Emily Carter crouched beside a worn-out couch, counting coins on the coffee table, quarters, dimes, pennies, stacking and restacking them as if they might multiply if she tried hard enough. Her 5-year-old son Noah sat quietly on the floor, hugging a stuffed dinosaur missing one eye, watching her with a patience no child should have to learn. The overhead light flickered, casting uneven shadows across peeling paint. "Mom, is the store still open?" he asked softly, and Emily forced a smile she didn't feel. "Yeah, baby, it's still open, just give me a second." Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. Typing quickly, too quickly. "James, I hate to ask again, but can you send $40 for formula? I'll pay you back Friday." She hit send before doubt could catch up, then exhaled, leaning back against the couch as exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders. She didn't notice the number was wrong, not yet. Back in the penthouse, Daniel set his briefcase down but didn't move any further, his eyes fixed on the screen. He didn't recognize the number, didn't recognize the name, but something about the phrasing, the quiet dignity wrapped in desperation, pulled at a memory he couldn't quite place. He should ignore it. He knew that. Wrong number, not his problem, but his thumb hovered over the screen longer than usual, the words replaying in his mind. "My son is hungry." Across the city, Emily's phone buzzed, and her heart jumped, too fast, too hopeful. She grabbed it, expecting James, expecting relief, but the reply made her stomach drop. "I think you have the wrong number, I'm not James." Heat rushed to her face as she checked the number again, her breath catching when she realized the mistake. "I'm so sorry," she typed quickly, "please ignore that, wrong number." She set the phone down, pressing her hands to her temples. Another failure. Another reminder that even small things were slipping through her fingers lately. She glanced at Noah, who offered her a small, reassuring smile, as if he were the one comforting her. "It's okay, Mom, we can eat cereal," he said, and something inside her tightened. Back in the penthouse, Daniel stared at her apology, his jaw tightening slightly. He could end it there, should end it there, but instead, almost without thinking, he typed back, "Is your son going to be okay?" He paused, reading the words again, surprised at himself, then hit send. The message crossing a distance measured not just in miles, but in worlds. Emily's phone buzzed again, and she hesitated this time, staring at the screen, a stranger asking a question no one else had asked that day, no one else had time to ask. Her fingers hovered, caught between caution and something fragile, something like hope, and for the first time in hours, she didn't feel completely alone. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice before Emily finally typed back, "We will manage, thank you," her thumb hovering over the screen as if she might erase the words, but she did not, because pride had already cost her too much this week. Across the city Daniel read her reply and leaned back slightly, the leather chair creaking under the weight of a man who had built an empire on decisions made in seconds. Yet this one felt strangely heavier. "You do not have to manage alone," he typed. Then paused, considering how it might sound, too forward, too personal, but he sent it anyway. Emily frowned at the message, her instincts immediately cautious. Strangers did not offer help without reason, not in her experience, not without something expected in return. "I appreciate it, but I do not take money from people I do not know," she replied, her tone polite but firm. She set the phone down again, exhaling slowly as she reached for the coins, counting them one more time even though she already knew the total would not change. $23.17, still not enough. Noah shifted closer to her, his small hand resting lightly on her arm. "It is okay, Mom, I am not that hungry," he said quietly, and that was the moment something inside her cracked just a little, because children were not supposed to say things like that, not at 5 years old. Back in the penthouse, Daniel stared at her message, a faint smile touching his lips, not amusement, but respect. She was careful, guarded, and he understood that. He had built his life the same way, layer by layer, trust earned, not given, smart policy. He typed, then added after a brief hesitation, I am Daniel, now I am not a stranger. What kind of formula does your son need? Emily blinked at the screen, reading the message twice, then a third time. The name meant nothing to her. Just another man in a city full of them, but the way he asked, direct, without pressure, without condition, made it harder to dismiss. She rubbed her forehead, exhaustion clouding her usual judgment. She had not slept more than 3 hours at a time in days, and the weight of constant worry was beginning to blur the lines between caution and survival. It is called gentle care, she typed slowly. It is the only one that does not upset his stomach. She immediately added, but it is expensive. You really do not have to do this. Daniel read the name and without another word opened a second screen. His assistant would have handled something like this instantly, but he did not call anyone, not yet. Instead he asked, do you have a payment app? Emily hesitated longer this time, her heart beating faster as she stared at the question. Every warning she had ever heard echoed in her mind, every story about scams, about people pretending to help. But then she glanced at Noah again, at the quiet way he was pretending not to be tired, not to be hungry, and something shifted. She typed her username with a deep breath, telling herself she could block him at the first sign of anything wrong. The notification came almost instantly, a sharp chime that made her flinch. She looked down, expecting $40, maybe $50 at most. Her eyes widened as the number settled on the screen, $400. Her breath caught as she stared at it, unable to process what she was seeing. This is too much, she typed quickly, her fingers shaking now. I cannot accept this, there must be a mistake. Across the city Daniel read her message and shook his head slightly. There was no mistake. Consider it an advance for the next few months, he replied, one less thing to worry about. Emily's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She had held everything together for so long, through job loss, through bills, through long nights and longer days, but this unexpected kindness from someone who owed her nothing broke through every wall she had built. Thank you, she typed, the words too small for what she felt. She set the phone down slowly, pressing her hand against her chest as she tried to steady her breathing, and for the first time in weeks, the room did not feel quite as heavy. But across the city, Daniel was still staring at the conversation, his expression no longer neutral, because something about the name she had used earlier, something about the timing, the age, the quiet details between the lines, did not sit right with him, and he could not yet explain why. Daniel did not sleep much that night, not because of work, not because of the pending merger his board had been pressuring him about for weeks, but because of a name that refused to leave his mind, Noah. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window long after the city lights had softened into early morning gray, his phone still in his hand, the last message from Emily glowing faintly on the screen. Thank you, simple, sincere, undeserved. And yet it stayed with him. He replayed every detail of their conversation, every word, every pause. Something about it did not feel random, did not feel like coincidence, and Daniel Hayes did not believe in coincidences, not after everything it had taken to build his life from nothing. He turned away from the window and walked toward his desk, setting the phone down with more care than usual, then opening his laptop, his fingers moving quickly, pulling up records, timelines, fragments of a past he rarely revisited. 6 years ago, a charity event in Boston, a late evening, too much noise, too many conversations that meant nothing, and then there had been her. He could not remember her face clearly, only the feeling, the way she had spoken without pretense, without calculation, a rare thing in his world. They had talked longer than he expected, longer than he allowed himself to talk to anyone, and then the night had ended, no promises, no exchanged numbers. Just a moment that had slipped quietly into memory, or so he thought. His jaw tightened slightly as he calculated dates, months, possibilities. Noah was 5, maybe 6 soon. The timing aligned too closely to ignore, too precisely to dismiss. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This was not enough. It was speculation, nothing more, but it was enough to make him act. Across the city Emily stood in a small grocery store aisle, her hands gripping the handle of a shopping cart that held more than she had bought in weeks, formula, fresh fruit, a loaf of bread that did not come from the discount shelf. Items she had passed by so many times before. She moved carefully, almost as if someone might stop her and tell her it was a mistake, that she did not belong here, that this was not for her. Noah walked beside her, his small fingers brushing against the boxes, his eyes wide with quiet excitement. "Can we really get this one, Mom?" he asked, holding up a box of his favorite cereal. She hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Yes, baby, we can get that one." His smile was immediate, bright in a way she had not seen in days, and it made something inside her ache and heal at the same time. At the checkout counter, she handed over her phone with steady hands, watching the total rise higher than she would normally allow, but the payment went through without hesitation, the receipt printed smoothly, no rejection, no embarrassment, just a simple transaction that felt like a small miracle. Back in his office, Daniel pressed a button on his desk. His assistant answered immediately. "Clear your schedule this morning," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I need everything on a woman named Emily Carter," and then after a brief pause he added, "and a child named Noah." His assistant did not ask questions, she never did. "Of course, sir, I will have a report within the hour." Daniel ended the call and stared at the city again, the weight of something unfamiliar settling in his chest, not fear, not yet, but something close to it, because if he was right, if the pieces aligned the way he suspected, then this was no longer just a wrong number, it was something far more complicated, far more personal. And across the city, as Emily helped Noah into his small car seat outside the grocery store, her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She pulled it out absent-mindedly, expecting nothing more than a notification, but the message on the screen made her freeze, her breath catching as she read it once, then again. "Can you tell me your son's full name and his date of birth?" The question was simple, direct, but something about it sent a quiet chill through her, as if the fragile distance between her world and his had just begun to disappear. Emily did not answer right away, her fingers tightening slightly around the phone as she stood beside her car, the grocery bags resting on the asphalt for just a moment longer than they should have. The question was simple, almost harmless on the surface, but something about the way it was asked, direct and precise, made her heart beat a little faster. She glanced at Noah through the open car door, watching him buckle himself in with careful concentration, his small hands working the latch the way she had taught him, unaware of the shift happening just a few feet away. Emily swallowed slowly and looked back at the screen, her mind racing through possibilities. Why would he ask that? Why would a stranger care about details like that? Across the city, Daniel stood motionless in his office, his phone in hand, his gaze fixed on the message he had sent. He rarely second-guessed himself, but this time was different. This time the answer mattered in a way he could not fully explain. The silence stretched longer than he expected, longer than he was comfortable with, each passing second sharpening the edge of uncertainty. Then finally, her reply came through. "Noah Carter, June 17, 2020. Daniel's breath stilled, not visibly, not in a way anyone else would notice, but inside something shifted, something quiet and undeniable. He turned slightly, setting the phone down with deliberate care as if sudden movement might break the fragile line of logic forming in his mind. "June 17th, he repeated silently, counting backward, calculating again, but the numbers did not change, they only confirmed what he had already begun to suspect. His assistant's voice came through the intercom a moment later, her tone professional as always. "Sir, I have preliminary information on Emily Carter." Daniel pressed the button without hesitation, put it through. The screen on his desk lit up with documents. Employment records, address history, fragments of a life built on survival rather than stability. He scanned quickly, eyes moving with practiced efficiency, until one detail caught and held his attention. Boston, 6 years ago. His jaw tightened slightly, the room suddenly feeling smaller despite the open glass walls. Across town, Emily finally placed the grocery bags in the back seat and closed the door, her phone still in her hand. She read his last message again, searching for something hidden between the words, something that would explain the unease settling in her chest. She typed slowly this time. "Why are you asking that?" Her thumb hovered for a moment before she sent it, the question simple but necessary, because whatever this was, it was no longer just about a kind stranger helping her buy groceries. Back in the penthouse, Daniel read her question and exhaled quietly. There it was. The moment where everything could shift. He could lie, he could soften it, he could walk away entirely and return to the safe distance of assumption, but that was not who he was, not when something mattered, and this mattered more than he was ready to admit. He picked up the phone again, his expression steady, his tone controlled even in text. "Because I think I might know you." He sent it before hesitation could intervene. Across the city Emily felt the words land heavier than she expected, her breath catching slightly as she read them, the noise of passing cars and distant traffic fading into the background. "I do not think so," she replied quickly, almost instinctively, her mind already rejecting the possibility, because if he knew her, if there was some connection she did not remember, then what else had she missed, what else had slipped through the cracks of the life she had been struggling to hold together? Noah's voice pulled her back. "Mom, can we go home now?" She looked at him, at the quiet trust in his eyes, and forced a small nod. "Yes, baby, we are going home," but as she started the engine, her phone buzzed again, and this time when she looked at the screen, the message waiting there made her hands go still on the steering wheel. "Do you remember Boston?" The words were simple, but they carried weight, the kind that does not ask for attention, it demands it. And for the first time since this conversation began, Emily felt something deeper than confusion, something closer to realization, like a door she had forgotten existed was slowly beginning to open. Emily did not start the car right away, her hands resting on the steering wheel as the words lingered in her mind. "Do you remember Boston?" The question echoed louder than it should have, louder than the passing traffic, louder than Noah softly humming in the back seat. Boston was not just a place, it was a chapter she had carefully folded away, tucked into the far corners of her memory where it could not interfere with the life she had built afterward. She swallowed slowly, her eyes fixed ahead, but not really seeing the street in front of her. 6 years ago she had been a different person, hopeful in ways she no longer allowed herself to be, working long shifts at a small event venue, picking up extra hours whenever she could. That night had been like any other at first, a crowded charity gala, too many voices blending into one, the soft glow of chandeliers reflecting off polished floors. She remembered carrying trays, weaving through guests who barely noticed her, until one conversation had slowed her down, one voice that did not sound like the others, calm, steady, asking her a question no one ever asked. "Are you okay?" She had looked up, surprised, meeting the eyes of a man who did not belong to her world but did not seem to mind standing in it for a moment. They had talked briefly, longer than she should have allowed during a shift, about simple things, nothing important, nothing that should have stayed with her. And yet it had, because for once she had not felt invisible. The memory flickered and faded as quickly as it came, replaced by the present, by the weight of reality pressing back in. Emily blinked and looked down at her phone again, her fingers moving slowly this time. "Yes, I remember Boston," she typed, then hesitated before adding, "Why?" Across the city Daniel read her response and closed his eyes for a brief second, not in relief, not entirely, but in recognition, because the past he had been trying to piece together was no longer just his own, it belonged to her too. He walked back toward the window, the city stretching endlessly beneath him, but his focus was no longer on the skyline, it was on the small thread connecting two moments separated by years. "Do you remember the charity event?" he typed, his words measured, careful, each one carrying more weight than he usually allowed himself to show. "The one at the Harborview Hotel." Emily's breath caught again, sharper this time, because that detail was not something a stranger could guess, not something coincidence could explain. Her mind raced back to that night, to the quiet conversation, to the way it had ended. Without expectation, without exchange, just a brief intersection of two lives that were never meant to cross again. Her heart began to beat faster, not from fear exactly, but from the sudden shift in understanding, the realization that this was no longer random, that there was a reason behind every question he had asked, every message he had sent. Noah's voice broke through her thoughts again, softer this time. "Mom, are you okay?" She turned slightly, offering him a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, I am okay, just thinking." She looked back at the phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed, "I was working that night." She paused, then added, "You talked to me for a few minutes." There was a long silence after she sent it, the kind that stretches time, that makes every second feel heavier than the last. Across the city Daniel stared at her message, his jaw tightening just slightly as the final piece settled into place. It was not just a possibility anymore, not just a theory, it was real, and it changed everything. He picked up the phone again, his next words no longer cautious, no longer distant, but steady, certain. "Emily," he typed, and for the first time used her name directly. "I need to ask you something important." The message appeared on her screen. And as Emily read it, she felt the world around her shift just enough to make everything feel uncertain, like the ground beneath her life was no longer as stable as it had been just moments before, and she realized, with a quiet clarity that settled deep in her chest, that whatever he was about to say next, it would not be something she could ignore. Emily stared at the screen, her breath shallow now, the words "I need to ask you something important" settling heavily in her chest. She could feel it coming before he even said it, that shift in tone, that quiet certainty in his messages. It was no longer a conversation between strangers, it was something else entirely, something that had roots she had not been ready to uncover. She swallowed and typed back slowly, "What is it?" her fingers hesitating for just a second before she sent it, across the city. Daniel did not respond immediately, not because he did not know what to say, but because for the first time in a long time, he understood the weight of his own words before he sent them. He walked back to his desk, placing both hands on the surface, grounding himself in something solid, something certain, because what he was about to ask would change more than just his life, it would change hers, and possibly the life of a child who had no idea any of this was happening. He exhaled slowly, then finally typed, "Did you ever try to find me after that night?" Emily's heart skipped, not from surprise, but from recognition, because she had expected this question in some form, just not so directly. She looked at Noah again, watching him trace shapes on the window with his finger, completely unaware, completely safe in a world that had been simple until this moment. She looked back at her phone, her reply coming slower this time, more careful. "No, I did not." She paused, then added, "I did not even know your name." The truth felt heavier now than it had back then. Across the city. Daniel read her answer and nodded slightly to himself. It aligned with what he had already learned, what his assistant had quietly confirmed minutes ago. No records, no attempts to reach out, no signs of manipulation or intent, just a clean break, a moment that had ended exactly as it had begun, unexpectedly. He typed again, "And you never thought about it again?" The question was softer, less direct, but it carried its own weight. Emily let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh, not because it was funny, but because of how complicated the answer was. "I did," she admitted, her fingers moving more honestly now. "For a while," she added, then after a brief pause, "but life did not really give me time to keep thinking about it." Her eyes drifted toward Noah again, and that was explanation enough. Daniel read her words and felt something settle into place, not relief exactly, but clarity, because everything she said matched what he saw, what he had already begun to understand about her. She was not someone who chased opportunity, she was someone who survived reality, and that difference mattered more than anything else. He picked up the phone again, his next message slower, deliberate. "Emily," he typed, "I need you to be honest with me." He paused, his thumb hovering just for a second, then continued, "Is there any chance that Noah could be mine?" The message sent, the words landing with a finality that could not be taken back. Across the city. Emily felt the air leave her lungs as she read it, her vision narrowing slightly as everything around her seemed to blur, the passing cars, the distant noise, even the quiet hum of the engine beneath her hands, all fading into the background, leaving only that one question, simple, direct, impossible to ignore. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, memories rising whether she wanted them to or not. That night, that conversation, the timing, the realization she had pushed aside for years because it had been easier not to ask, easier not to know. Her grip tightened slightly on the phone, her heart pounding now in a way she could not control, and for the first time since this began, she understood that this was not just a conversation anymore, it was the moment everything she had built her life around was about to be questioned, and whatever answer she gave next, it would not just change her future, it would rewrite her past. Emily did not answer immediately, her fingers frozen around the phone as Daniel's question echoed in her mind, "Is there any chance that Noah could be mine?" The words felt heavier than anything she had read in years, heavier than unpaid bills, heavier than sleepless nights, because this was not about survival anymore, this was about truth, and truth had a way of changing everything. She looked at Noah in the rearview mirror, his small face relaxed as he watched the world pass by outside the window, unaware of the weight sitting in his mother's silence. Emily swallowed hard, her thoughts racing back through time, through months she had forced herself not to examine too closely. After Boston, after that night, she had returned to her routine, her shifts, her responsibilities, and when she found out she was pregnant weeks later, there had been no certainty, only questions she did not have the luxury to chase. She had tried to calculate dates, tried to be logical, but life had not given her clear answers, only urgency, only the need to move forward, to protect the child growing inside her. She had chosen not to search, not to wonder too deeply, because wondering did not pay rent, wondering did not prepare her for motherhood, and now, years later, those unanswered questions had come back, not as quiet thoughts, but as a voice on the other end of a message, asking directly for the truth she had avoided. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed. "I do not know." She stopped, erased it, then typed again, slower this time, more honest. "I never knew for sure." She sent it before she could second-guess herself, the words leaving her feeling exposed in a way she had not expected. Across the city Daniel read her reply, his expression tightening just slightly, not from anger, but from the weight of possibility becoming more real, more immediate. He had expected denial, expected resistance, but not uncertainty, not this quiet admission that opened the door even wider. He exhaled slowly, his mind already moving ahead, aligning facts, building the next step with the same precision he used in every major decision. Except this time it was personal, deeply personal. He typed carefully, "Thank you for being honest," then paused before continuing, "There is a way to know for sure." Emily's phone buzzed again, and her heart jumped before she even looked at the screen. She read his message, her breath catching slightly at the implication behind it. She knew what he meant before he said it, before the next message appeared. "A simple test," he wrote, "something non-invasive, quick, completely safe. We can have clear answers." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, her head resting lightly against the seat as she tried to steady her breathing. Clear answers, the words sounded comforting, but they also carried a finality she was not sure she was ready for, because once you knew the truth, you could not return to uncertainty, you could not go back to the life built on not knowing. She opened her eyes and looked at Noah again, at the quiet way he held his toy, at the life she had built around him, stable in its own fragile way, and she realized that this decision was not just hers, it would affect him too, his future, his identity, everything. Her fingers hovered over the screen, caught between fear and responsibility, between the past she had buried and the future that was suddenly knocking at her door, and for a long moment, she did nothing, the silence stretching between them, until finally, slowly, she began to type, her heart beating louder with each word. "What happens if you are right?" she asked, not because she needed the answer, but because she needed to hear him say it, needed to understand what this would mean before she took another step forward. And as the message sent, Emily realized that whatever came next, it would not just reveal the truth, it would redefine everything she thought she understood about her life. Daniel read her question twice, not because he did not understand it, but because he did, completely. "What happens if you are right?" It was not just curiosity, it was fear, responsibility, the weight of a life she had carried alone for years. He leaned back in his chair, the city stretching endlessly behind him, but for once, none of it mattered, not the skyline, not the deals waiting on his desk, not the empire he had spent decades building, because this was different. This was not something he could control with strategy or negotiation. This was human. He picked up his phone again, his reply slower than usual, measured in a way that reflected something deeper than confidence. "If I am right," he typed, then paused, choosing his next words carefully, "then it means Noah is my son." He stopped again, letting that settle before continuing, "And it means you should not have had to do this alone." Across the city Emily felt her breath catch again, not because of the words themselves, but because of how he said them. There was no demand, no assumption of control, just a quiet acknowledgement of something that could have been, something that should have been different. She stared at the message, her fingers tightening slightly around the phone, and for a moment, she did not feel angry, she did not feel defensive, she felt something else, something unfamiliar, like the possibility of not being alone anymore. But that thought scared her just as much as the truth, because she had built her life around independence, around the certainty that no one else was coming, that everything depended on her, and now that foundation was shifting, Slowly but undeniably, Noah's voice pulled her back again, softer this time. "Mom, are we getting ice cream today?" She turned slightly, offering him a small smile. "Maybe later, okay," she said gently, her voice steady even as her thoughts were anything but. She looked back at the phone, her mind searching for the right question, the right response, but nothing felt sufficient, nothing felt safe. "What do you want from us?" she finally typed, the words simple but heavy, because that was the real question beneath everything else, not just about biology, not just about the past, but about intention, about what he planned to do with the truth if it was confirmed. Across the city Daniel read her message and nodded slightly. He had expected that. She was not just protecting herself, she was protecting her son, and that mattered, more than anything else. It told him exactly who she was. He stood and walked back toward the window, his reflection faint against the glass, a man who had everything the world could offer, yet somehow standing at the edge of something completely new. He typed again, "I want to know the truth," he began, then added, "and if Noah is my son, I want to be part of his life, not to take him away, not to change what you have built, but to support him, to give him what he deserves." He paused, then added one more line, "and to make sure you never have to struggle like this again." Emily read the message slowly, each word settling into place, not as a promise she could trust immediately, but as something she could not dismiss either, because there was no arrogance in it, no attempt to take control, just a quiet offer that acknowledged everything she had done on her own. She leaned back slightly in her seat, her eyes closing for a brief moment as she tried to process it all, the past, the present, the future that was suddenly uncertain, and for the first time, she allowed herself to consider something she had not in years. What if things could be different? Her phone buzzed again before she could respond, a new message appearing beneath the last one, simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. "I am sending a car to you." Emily's eyes opened immediately, her breath catching as she read the next line, "We can do the test today." And then after a brief pause, one more message appeared, the words carrying a quiet authority that sent a ripple through her chest, "Please bring Noah with you." And as Emily stared at the screen, she realized that the moment she had been avoiding, the truth she had kept at a distance for years, was no longer something she could postpone. It was here, waiting, and ready to change everything. Emily did not move right away, her eyes fixed on the screen as the message lingered in front of her. "I am sending a car to you." The words felt unreal, like something meant for someone else, someone who lived in a different world, not her, not a woman who counted coins and measured groceries by necessity. Her fingers tightened slightly around the phone as she read the next line again, "We can do the test today." The finality of it settled deep in her chest. This was no longer a conversation she could pause or revisit later. This was a moment demanding a decision, now, not tomorrow, not next week, now. She looked at Noah again, his small face pressed lightly against the window, tracing invisible shapes with his finger, completely unaware that his life might be about to change in ways he could not yet understand. Emily inhaled slowly, steadying herself, then finally typed back, "Where?" Across the city Daniel read her response and felt something shift, not relief exactly, but confirmation. That she was not running, that she was willing to face this. He responded quickly this time, "A private medical facility, discreet and fast, my team will handle everything." He paused, then added, "You will not have to worry about anything." Emily read the message and let out a quiet breath, not because she fully trusted it, but because there was a calm certainty in his words that made it harder to resist. Her phone buzzed again before she could reply. "The car will arrive in 15 minutes, she looked up instinctively, as if expecting to see it already there, but the street outside remained unchanged, ordinary, familiar, and yet everything about this moment felt different. She turned the key and started the engine, her hands moving automatically now, muscle memory guiding her as her mind processed everything else. "Okay," she typed simply, then placed the phone down beside her, her heart still beating faster than usual. She pulled out of the parking lot slowly, heading toward home, the drive feeling shorter than usual, as if time itself had decided to move differently today. When she pulled into her apartment complex, she sat in the car for a moment longer, her hands resting on the wheel, her gaze unfocused. Then finally she turned to Noah. "Hey, sweetheart, we are going to go on a little trip," she said softly, her voice steady despite everything. Noah looked at her with curiosity. "A trip, where?" he asked. Emily hesitated for just a second, then smiled gently, just somewhere we need to go," she replied. Helping him out of the car and gathering the groceries quickly, inside the apartment, everything looked the same worn couch, the same flickering light, the same quiet space she had fought so hard to keep, but it felt different now, like it was already becoming something she was about to leave behind, even if only for a moment. She moved quickly, placing the groceries on the counter, grabbing Noah's jacket, checking her phone again as the minutes ticked by, then finally, a sleek black car pulled up outside, its presence unmistakable against the faded surroundings. Emily froze for just a second as she saw it through the window, her breath catching as reality settled in fully. This was happening. She turned to Noah, taking his hand gently. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded without hesitation, trusting her completely, and that trust made her chest tighten just a little more. They stepped outside together, the driver already waiting, opening the door with quiet professionalism. Emily hesitated for just a moment before stepping forward, her grip on Noah's hand firm but gentle. As they climbed into the car, the door closed behind them with a soft, final sound, and as the vehicle pulled away from the only life she had known for years, Emily realized there was no turning back now. Whatever truth awaited them at the end of this ride, it was already in motion, and she was heading straight toward it. The car moved smoothly through the city, its quiet engine barely noticeable against the soft hum of traffic, but inside, every second felt louder than it should have. Emily sat still, her hands resting in her lap, fingers lightly intertwined as if holding onto something invisible, something steady. Noah sat beside her, his legs swinging slightly above the floorboard, his eyes wide as he looked out the tinted window. Everything outside passing by faster than he was used to, taller buildings, cleaner streets, a world that looked nothing like the one they had just left behind. "Mom, this car is really nice," he said softly, his voice filled with simple wonder. Emily forced a small smile, her eyes still distant. "Yes, it is," she replied quietly, her mind somewhere else entirely. Across town, Daniel stood near the entrance of the private medical facility, his posture straight, his expression calm. But there was something beneath it, something unfamiliar, anticipation mixed with something deeper, something personal. He had already spoken to the doctors, already arranged everything. The process would be quick, efficient, discreet, just a simple test, just data, numbers, results, things he understood, things he could control, and yet, none of it felt simple, not today. A black car pulled into the driveway, and for a brief second, Daniel did not move, his eyes fixed on the vehicle as it came to a stop. The door opened, and Emily stepped out first, her movements careful, measured, as if the ground beneath her might shift if she moved too quickly. Noah followed, his small hand immediately finding hers, holding on without hesitation. Daniel took a step forward then, closing the distance slowly, not as a CEO approaching a situation, but as a man stepping into something uncertain. Emily looked up and met his eyes. For the first time since that night years ago, and everything else seemed to fall away, the city noise, the quiet hum of the building, even the passing seconds, all fading into the background, leaving only recognition, not clear, not immediate, but enough to connect the memory to the present. "You look the same," she said softly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Daniel let out a quiet breath, not quite a laugh, not quite relief. "Time has been kinder to you," he replied gently, his voice steady, but warmer than before. Noah looked between them, his small hand tightening slightly around his mother's. "Who is he, Mom?" he asked, his voice curious but cautious. Emily hesitated, her gaze shifting briefly, not ready to answer that question yet. "Not yet, sweetheart," she said softly, her hand brushing lightly over his hair. Daniel noticed the hesitation, but did not press. "Not now." "Not before they had answers." "This way," he said, gesturing toward the entrance, his tone respectful, not commanding, as if giving her the choice even though everything was already in motion. They walked inside together, the environment immediately different, clean, quiet, controlled, the faint scent of antiseptic in the air, soft lighting reflecting off polished surfaces, everything designed to feel calm, to feel safe. But for Emily, it only made her more aware of how out of place she felt. A nurse approached with a gentle smile, her voice warm and professional. "We are ready for you." "It will only take a few minutes," Emily nodded slowly, her grip on Noah's hand tightening just slightly. As they were led down a short hallway, each step felt heavier than the last, not physically, but emotionally. because at the end of this, there would be no more questions, only answers. Daniel followed a few steps behind, his gaze steady, his thoughts focused, but even he could feel the weight of what was about to happen. The quiet finality of it. The nurse stopped at a small room and opened the door. Inside, everything was prepared, simple, clinical, efficient. Emily paused at the threshold, her breath catching for just a moment, then she stepped inside, Noah following close beside her, trusting her without question, as always, and as the door closed behind them, the world outside seemed to fade completely, leaving only this moment, this test, and the truth. That was about to change everything. The room was quieter than Emily expected, the kind of silence that felt intentional, as if even sound had been carefully measured and controlled. The nurse moved with calm efficiency, preparing the small kit on the counter, her voice gentle as she explained the process, just a simple cheek swab, painless, quick, nothing to worry about. Noah looked up at his mother, his eyes curious but not afraid. "Are they going to give me a shot?" he asked softly. Emily knelt down beside him immediately, her hand brushing gently against his cheek. "No, sweetheart, nothing like that, just a quick test, like when they check your temperature." He nodded slowly, trusting her without hesitation, and that trust made her chest tighten again, because she knew she was asking him to step into something he could not understand. Daniel stood a few feet away, watching quietly, his hands loosely at his sides. He had been in countless high-pressure situations. Negotiations that could shift markets, decisions that affected thousands of people, but none of them had ever felt like this. None of them had required this kind of stillness, this kind of patience. The nurse approached Noah first, smiling warmly as she explained what she was doing. He followed her instructions carefully, opening his mouth slightly as she gently swabbed the inside of his cheek. It was over in seconds. "See, all done," she said softly, and Noah smiled a little, glancing back at his mother as if to confirm that everything was okay. Emily nodded, her own expression steady even as her heart continued to race. Then the nurse turned to Daniel, her movements the same, professional, precise. He stepped forward without hesitation, allowing the test to be completed just as quickly. No discomfort, no complication, just a simple action that carried so much meaning beneath it. The samples were sealed, labeled, and placed into a small container. The nurse turned back to them with a reassuring smile. "We will have the results shortly," she said, her tone calm, as if she had done this 1,000 times before, which she probably had. But for Emily, for Daniel, this was not routine, this was everything. They stepped back into the waiting area, the door closing softly behind them. The hallway felt longer now, the air slightly heavier, as if time itself had slowed down. Just enough to make every second noticeable. Noah climbed into a chair beside his mother, swinging his legs again. "Can we get ice cream after this?" he asked, his voice light, unaware of the tension surrounding him. Emily let out a small breath, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Yes, baby, we can get ice cream," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet promise she hoped she could keep. Daniel stood across from them, his posture composed, but his gaze kept drifting toward the child. Studying small details, the shape of his eyes, the way he held himself, subtle things that meant nothing and everything at the same time. He did not speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because words felt unnecessary in this moment. The truth was coming, whether they were ready or not. Minutes passed slowly, each one stretching longer than the last, until finally, the door opened again. The nurse stepped out, holding a small folder, her expression professional but softened just slightly, as if she understood the weight of what she carried. Emily felt her breath catch before she even stood, her hand instinctively finding Noah's again. Daniel took a step forward, his focus sharp now, everything else fading into the background. The nurse looked between them briefly, then spoke, her voice calm, clear, and impossible to misinterpret. "The results are ready," and in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the truth that would define everything that came next. The nurse stepped closer, the folder held carefully in her hands as if it carried more than just paper, as if she understood that inside it was not just a result but a turning point. Emily felt her grip tighten around Noah's hand, her fingers instinctively protective, while Noah looked up at her, sensing the shift even if he did not understand it. Daniel stood still, his expression controlled, but his eyes fixed on the folder, every instinct in him focused on what came next. The nurse opened it slowly, her movements deliberate, giving them a moment that felt both too short and too long at the same time. She glanced down briefly, confirming what was already written, then looked back up at them, her voice calm, steady, and clear. The results confirm a 99.9% probability of paternity. Emily felt the words before she fully processed them, like a quiet wave that reached her chest and stayed there, heavy, undeniable. Her breath caught, her eyes lowering for a brief moment as everything she had held uncertain for years suddenly became clear, not a possibility anymore, not a question, but a fact. Daniel did not move at first, the confirmation settling into him with a quiet intensity. He had expected it, prepared for it, but hearing it spoken aloud was different. It made it real in a way nothing else could. His gaze shifted slowly toward Noah, studying him not as a possibility anymore, but as his son, and something in his expression softened, something that had been guarded for years. Emily exhaled slowly, her mind racing through memories, through choices, through every moment she had carried alone, and now those moments felt different, not erased, not diminished, but shared in a way she had never planned for. Noah looked between them, his small voice breaking the silence. "What does that mean, Mom?" Emily swallowed, her throat tight as she searched for the right words, the right way to explain something so big to someone so small. "It means," she paused, her voice soft but steady, "it means he is your dad." Noah blinked, the concept settling in slowly, his eyes moving to Daniel with quiet curiosity, like he was trying to understand a new piece of a puzzle he did not know existed. Daniel took a small step forward, not too close, not too fast, respecting the space between them, his voice lower. Now, gentler. "Hi, Noah," he said, the words simple but carrying more meaning than anything else he had said that day. Noah hesitated, then gave a small, uncertain wave. "Hi," he replied, his voice soft but not afraid. Emily watched the exchange, her heart pulling in two directions at once, relief and uncertainty, hope and fear, all existing together in a way that felt overwhelming and yet strangely right. The nurse quietly closed the folder and stepped back, giving them space, understanding that this moment belonged to them now. Daniel looked at Emily again, his expression steady but different, not just focused, not just controlled, but present, truly present. "Thank you for bringing him," he said quietly, his voice carrying a sincerity that did not need to be explained. Emily nodded slowly, her emotions still settling, still shifting. "I needed to know," she replied, her voice just as soft. The room fell into a quiet stillness, not empty, but full of something new, something fragile, something that had not existed before this moment. And as Noah stood there between them, looking from one to the other, the truth no longer something hidden or uncertain, but something real, something shared, it became clear that this was not an ending, it was a beginning, one that none of them had planned, but one that would change everything from this moment forward. They did not leave immediately, not because they did not know what to do next, but because none of them were ready to move too quickly away from a moment that had just changed everything. Emily stood there for a second longer than necessary, her hand still resting lightly on Noah's shoulder, as if grounding herself in something familiar while everything else shifted around her. Noah looked up at her again, then back at Daniel, his small voice quiet but clear. "So, you are really my dad, Daniel?" Felt the question settle deeply, not as pressure, but as responsibility. He lowered himself slightly, bringing his height closer to Noah's level, his tone gentle, steady. "Yes, I am," he said simply, not with hesitation, not with uncertainty, but with a calm certainty that made the words feel safe. Noah studied his face for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if accepting it in the simple way children sometimes accept the biggest truths. "Okay," he said, his voice soft, and just like that, the tension that had filled the room eased just a little, not gone, but softened. Emily let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, her eyes briefly closing as she allowed herself to feel it, not fear, not doubt, but something quieter, something closer to relief. They stepped outside together, the afternoon light softer now, the world continuing as it always did, unaware that for them, everything had changed. The black car waited where it had been, but it no longer felt like something foreign. It felt like a bridge between two lives that had just begun to connect. Daniel turned to Emily, his posture still composed, but his voice carrying something more personal now. "I know this is a lot," he said, his words careful but sincere. "I do not expect anything to change overnight." Emily nodded slowly, her gaze meeting his. "I would not let it," she replied gently, her tone firm but not defensive, just honest. Daniel gave a small nod in return, understanding exactly what she meant. Then he looked down at Noah again, his expression softening in a way that felt natural now. How about that ice cream you mentioned? He asked, his voice lightening just slightly. Noah's face brightened immediately, like a switch had been flipped. Really? He asked, his excitement simple and genuine. Daniel smiled, not the practiced smile he used in boardrooms, but something quieter, more real. Really, he confirmed. Emily watched the exchange, something warm settling in her chest, not trust, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become it. They got into the car together, this time without hesitation, the door closing behind them with a familiar sound that no longer felt final, but instead like the start of something new. The drive was different now, quieter in a way that felt more comfortable. Noah talked about his favorite ice cream flavors, his words filling the space with a kind of normalcy that grounded everything else. Daniel listened, asking simple questions, learning small details, building something piece by piece, while Emily sat beside them, watching, listening, allowing herself to exist in this moment without trying to control what came next. As the city moved around them, as the distance between their worlds slowly began to close, one truth remained clear. This had started with a mistake, a single message sent to the wrong number, but what followed was not accidental, not random, because sometimes, the things we think are mistakes are the very moments that lead us exactly where we were meant to be. And as Noah laughed softly in the back seat, and Daniel glanced at him with quiet pride, Emily realized something she had not believed in for a long time, that maybe, just maybe, life had a way of finding the right people, even when everything began the wrong way.